Commencing test number 346. In this case, the test subject is the listener. I say listener as opposed to watcher, which has been used mainly in the past, as previous tests consisted of visual stimuli, ranging anywhere from up-close images of insects mating to recently deceased human cadavers, all in the efforts to obtain as much information as possible on the test subject's individual fear reactions. Initial tests were met with unsatisfactory results. The artificial neural network, or Anne as she prefers to be called, was tasked with collecting and analyzing the quite sizable sets of data involved with this project. And with that data, Anne surmised that the test subjects required more creative and some would say archaic methods to truly experience the levels of fear the tests were trying to achieve. Further tests going forward will move away from visual images and instead focus on what some might say is the original method of spreading fear, telling stories. Specifically stories that are at least reported to be true. Acquired through a very loose partnership our organization has with certain clandestine connections associated with the Sinclair Foundation. The account, such as it is, goes like this. My name is Richard Thompson. I'm an former employee of the DWSD, the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department. The DWSD services just over 1,000 square miles below the surface. Anything from sewers and utility tunnels to the deeper, older sections that needed constant repairs. That was my job. Going into the deepest, oldest, most unsafe and compromised sections under the city. Making sure the whole damn thing didn't collapse. Some of the oldest tunnels go back to the late 1800s, and they show it. With all the changes over the years of a town becoming a city, becoming a metropolis, new sections of the tunnels are constantly being built on top of the old. To be honest, even I still don't understand the layout of the deepest sections. That's not to say I can't navigate them at this point. It's more that I literally don't understand the reason or use as to why they may have been built to begin with. For instance, certain sections of the older infrastructure remind me of, well, the pyramids, like in Egypt. Specifically the images you see of some of the deepest tunnels. Tight, constricting, smooth stone passageways that at some point you needed to crawl through on your stomach, and at other points opened up into huge cathedral-like rooms. A lot of the passageways were too small for a human to even fit through. I often wondered if they were meant to be some sort of ventilation system, but I never cared to ask. That wasn't my job. My job was simple. Scan the deeper sections for any failures, repair any serious damage, and make sure that each and every pipe, tunnel, corridor, and spillway was completely clean and clear. I never asked questions. Not when we found evidence of trespassing. Not when we found evidence of a crime. Hell, not even when me and my boss found actual human remains. We had to stay out of the sewers for a few days after that. The CSI unit was called in to sweep the place for evidence. I think they were CSI anyways. I remember they didn't have any insignia on their uniforms like other units I'd seen. Anyways, when we got the call that night, January 5th, 2004, I grabbed my gear like it was any other job. Really wish it had been. Me and my partner, Ezekiel James, everyone just called him Zeke, agreed to grab a warm cup of coffee from the nearby gas station before heading towards the pump station we would be servicing. Apparently, one of the pumps at Station 12 wasn't operating correctly, signifying a problem in one of the older tunnels. When we got to the pumps, we finished our lukewarm coffees, slipped on our protective gear, and made our way towards the utility entrance, leading to the catacombs below. Now, at this point, I'd been in these tunnels literally countless times over the years. But when we finally dropped down the rusty metal ladder into the deepest section of the tunnels, something felt wrong. I remembered worn stone walls, eroded from many years of waste and rainwater flowing past its surface. But the walls of these tunnels were different. The stone seemed newly dug, freshly chiseled, and something about it just seemed wrong in the harsh light of our headlamps. They were slippery to the touch. A thin, oily coating covered the surface and left a viscous yellow residue on the thick rubber glove covering my hand. The air felt humid and old, like the corridors themselves were sick somehow. Zeke shot me a look of worry, clearly confused himself. But we didn't speak, mainly because of the heavy respirator masks we wore over our faces. This was a usual part of our equipment this far deep, ensuring we had clean, breathable air, but ultimately reducing me and Zeke to nods and hand signals. We made our way in the direction the problem was suspected to be in. We walked for what seemed like 30 minutes, occasionally having to duck and maneuver past crumbled stonework or a long-dead root system that had burst its way through the tunnel ceiling. To be honest, the map really wasn't helping me at all in this situation. I kept it mostly for peace of mind, referring to it again and again, but if I'm being honest, I had absolutely no idea where me and Zeke were. We got to a clear intersection, unsure of which way to go and clearly needing to communicate, so we both pulled our respirator mask off and began to talk. That's when we heard the first scream. The scream was low and guttural. It was really far off, somewhere in the tunnels. Me and Zeke froze, looked at each other, both clearly unnerved by the sudden interruption. It sounded like some poor soul had just been impaled or something. The scream ended just as quickly as it began. The sort of sound that can only be made by the very last of a person's air escaping their lungs, just before they go limp. I don't know if you've ever heard a scream deep underground. The sound has nowhere to go. It's quickly forced through any and all nearby corridors, echoing on for what can seem like miles. Zeke's expression was a mixture halfway between horrified and confused. I didn't blame him, and most likely had the same look on my face. Who the hell else would be down here? Sure, urban explorers and teenagers get lost in the upper tunnels sometimes, seeking cheap thrills when there's nothing else to do on a Saturday night, but this was as deep as you could possibly go. As far as I knew, the tunnels this deep could only be accessed by a service door like the one we'd come through. Had HQ sent another team before us? If so, why not say anything? Did this person need help? He clearly sounded hurt. Should we go and try and help him? Just then the moaning scream came again. Zeke started to move in the direction he thought it'd come from when I grabbed him by his shoulder, stopping him in his place. The scream, if you could even call it that, was... I don't know, something was wrong with it, but I couldn't figure out what. Then it happened again. Closer this time, and I realized what was so off. The scream, each time it happened, was exactly the same. Like it had been a recording. Only it didn't sound like it came from a speaker. It sounded like someone was organically making the noise with their throat. Each time the length and pitch sounding identically precise. Zeke seemed to realize this too after the third time, his eyes now wide and wild-looking. He leaned in close to me. "It has to be someone that's hurt, right?" he whispered to me. It has to be someone that needs help." It almost felt like he wasn't asking me, as much as he was trying to convince himself. I didn't know what to say. My ears were straining to hear any more odd noises in the completely silent corridors. There was a long moment of us just listening, and then a noise did break the silence. The exact same scream came again, much closer this time, and after the echoes from it died down, I was suddenly aware I could hear what sounded like a dozen people sprinting full speed towards us from a passage on the right. Me and my young partner didn't need to say a word. We ran, hauling ass back in the general direction we thought we'd come from, the whole time hearing what sounded like a large group of people in pursuit not far behind, their hurried footsteps echoing down the stone tunnels after us. I didn't have time to think who they were or why they were chasing us. I just ran. I ran until nothing looked familiar, as if it had in the first place, and I realized slowly that I could no longer hear any mysterious pursuers. I also realized suddenly that I didn't hear Zeke's footsteps behind me anymore either. I stopped in a large room with several hallways branching off in different directions, and I turned to see no one there. Not a sadistic, ravenous group of people bearing down on us. Not even in us. I looked around. Zeke wasn't with me anymore. I listened for a moment, trying to hear over my heavy breathing and beating heart, but I couldn't hear anything. We must have gotten separated in the chase, and I thought to myself we had surely each gotten even more lost than we already were. I wasn't surprised to see that I didn't notice anything reminiscent of the tunnels around me at all, and decided I should backtrack the way I'd run from to try and find my partner. I had no idea which way he could have gone. The passageways and tunnels seemed to make no sense, looping around and coming back to where they began, or just abruptly ending in a chiseled stone wall. I did my best to make my way back to where I thought he might be, not wanting to call out in fear of whoever was chasing us earlier. At this point, I thought we had stumbled onto a crime. Some cult or group of murderers lured and killed someone down here, and we had interrupted them. That's what I thought, anyway. I really wish I'd been right. Suddenly, my radio crackled to life, cutting through the silence like a hot knife, and making me jump almost a foot. I had forgotten about it in all the commotion. Zeke's voice came through, faint and whispering. "Where the fuck are you?" It sounded like he'd been crying? I supposed he wasn't coping with the situation as well as I was, and I went to answer when I heard him speak again. Don't answer, please. I don't want my radio to sound. That thing is near me. I can hear it. But I turned my headlamp off so it won't see me. Please, Rick. Please help me if you can hear me. Please. I'm going to try and get back to where I think we split up. Please, man. I was so confused. That thing? What did he mean? I could still hear him breathing on the other end of the line. It was a mixture of quick, panicked breaths and quiet, uncontrolled sobbing. And I knew whatever was going on, as his superior, and because technically I was the first to turn and run, it was my job to find him and get us both back to safety. Then, I thought, later we could come back with the police and hopefully find out what's going on. As I was looking around, trying to find out which way he might have gone, I suddenly heard him take a quick inhale of air and then quietly say through the radio, "Oh, fuck." Then I heard the walkie-talkie go silent. Zeke had been holding his thumb down on the button the whole time since he first radioed. If you've ever used two-way radios like the one we'd been issued, once you release the button after speaking, there's a small, distinct beep that occurs. I heard that beep. The beep from Zeke's walkie-talkie. Right when he released his finger, the sharp, pronounced noise bounced down the stone corridors from my left. There was an awful silence for only a second. And then I heard Zeke let out the loudest, most primal scream I've ever heard any living creature make. It reminded me of a nature documentary I had watched once. The noise a young monkey had made while clenched in the jaws of a crocodile, being violently thrashed about. It was only for a moment, though. His cries were cut off just as quickly as they began. The very end of his yelling sounded like he'd been submerged underwater mid-scream. I began to run towards where I thought the screams had come from. I thought I heard something as I got close, and it sounded like something was being dragged away down a nearby hallway. And then I nearly tripped over something as I was running. I had kicked something hard on the ground mid-stride. It clattered along the floor and shattered against the opposite wall. I used my headlamp to see what I kicked and realized it was Zeke's walkie-talkie. Next to it, I seen a large red drag mark on the ground leading off into the dark. This must have been where he shut off his headlamp, where someone or something had just seemingly attacked him and dragged him away. I became aware of just how hard my heart was beating in my chest, and my thoughts shifted from safety to survival. I pulled out the pamphlet with the intricate series of maps, trying to find anything nearby I could recognize, when I heard a wet, scraping sound just around the corner from me. I froze. The scraping was quiet, but it was getting closer. It sounded like someone was walking while pressing a large, raw stake hard against the rough stone wall as it went. I did not want to see who or what was around that corner. I turned, and I ran faster than I ever have in my entire life. I weaved back to where I thought my best bet of escape might be. Behind me the whole time, I heard something in pursuit, like earlier when me and Zeke had first run. Whatever it was, it sounded heavy. That horrible, meaty scraping sound mixed with frantic scurrying, moving fast and keeping pace behind me. I turned corner after corner, zigging and zagging, admittedly freaking out and even tripping a few times as I went. My crazed mind burned with what I should do. How was I going to escape? That's when I turned a corner, and my heart completely sank. It was a dead end. I thought I was done for. And then I noticed the dead end had a small, narrow passageway in the middle of the wall, about 3 feet off the ground and about 2.5 feet wide. I didn't have time to think. I heard whatever the hell it was chasing me, just about to round the corner and reach me. I ran forward and nearly dove into the small tunnel head first. I crawled on my stomach, barely enough room to move my arms and legs, imagining the whole time that this person, this thing, would catch me. It would grab my legs and drag me right back out. Those few seconds, when just my legs were dangling out of the hole, were the most horrified I have ever been in my life. Finally, I pulled my legs inside and inched forward, just in time as I heard the awful tearing and scraping noise entering the dead end I had just been in. I crawled for another 8 feet or so and nearly broke my neck crashing to the ground on the other side. I lay there, breathing heavily for a moment, my labored breathing cutting through the sudden quiet, when the silence was broken by a quiet, whispering voice. "Oh, fuck." My eyes went wide. My breathing caught in my throat, and I very slowly got to my knees, and I angled my headlamp down the tight crawl space I'd just come through. "Zeke?" I said. On the other side of the tunnel, where I'd just been, I seen Zeke's face, looking back at me through the small hole. But something was wrong. I noticed his eyes didn't move or react to the bright light hitting them. He didn't move or respond to me when I spoke. His mouth hung open slightly. His gaze was distant and unfocused. His eyes were cloudy and white. He was clearly dead. And then I seen what was holding him up. What was holding his head up. No. Holding isn't the right word. Fused is the best word I can think of. Zeke's head was now crudely attached to what looked to be a badly injured human arm. It didn't look like his, though. I couldn't see how they'd become fused. It didn't make any sense. And as my eyes moved over the arm, I looked at what it connected to, and I nearly vomited. The arm was sticking out of a huge, throbbing and glistening blob of what looked like bruised, raw flesh, skinless and bleeding. Different limbs and hands and feet of all kinds stuck out at odd angles. I think I even saw a hoof. Some of them seemed to push and move the abomination along. Different sized and shaped eyes dotted the surface, pale and glassy, but still focused on me. I couldn't really tell, but it looked like some of them were crying. Wet and matted tufts of hair and yellow broken teeth stuck out intermittently, and behind it I could see a large, bloody and pus-stained path where it scraped along the floor and walls, even the ceiling. It seemed to completely fill whatever tunnel it was in, scraping and grating pieces of itself off as it went. I could see Zeke's dead face loose on his skull, and as the thing moved and began to squeeze itself into the narrow tunnel I had just crawled through, I could see his face begin to scrape against the wall and fall away, his face sliding off his skull like cooked chicken skin. It fell down onto the stone with a soft, wet plop as this thing began to squeeze and push itself towards me through the small tunnel. And I ran. I ran until I felt like I might throw up. I think I did throw up. But I didn't stop. I was delirious with fear, crashing into walls and corners, bruising my arms and shoulders, falling down and opening up a gash on my knee, but I did not stop. I ran and ran and ran. I couldn't hear anything in pursuit behind me, but I didn't care. Finally, just as I thought my legs were physically going to give out, I spotted a section of tunnel I vaguely recognized. A series of large metal pipes and valves that I'd had to service once a few years back. I was so out of my mind with fear that I still didn't allow myself to feel hope. Not when I found a set of stairs leading up. Not when I found the service door leading out. Not until I was outside in the evening sunlight and I had shoved a crowbar from my truck through the handle of the service door, jamming it shut best I could. Only then did I finally breathe a small sigh of relief, leaning back against my truck, staring at the jammed door. I thought for sure that thing was coming. I thought for sure I would see the door begin to shake, to hear banging and scraping coming from the other side, to hear my dead colleague's voice calling out to me. But it never happened. Eventually, someone from the company sent out another truck when we didn't report back. They found me sitting there, still watching the door. Apparently, I was suffering from shock. The rest of what happened all happened really fast, and it's a bit of a blur. I vaguely remember my boss trying to talk to me, and then the police showing up. They wanted to talk to me more, but I really wasn't much help. And by the time the ambulance showed up, I seen them at the door, pulling out the crowbar and heading inside. I don't remember much about my time in the hospital. I didn't stay there for more than a few days, and they had me on various medications. But I swear, I remember there being an old man. He was already sat next to me when I awoke. His hair looked like it had been brown, but white strands had taken over most of it through time. He wore all black, and I remember thinking it looked like he'd just come from a funeral. It was clearly after visiting hours, based on the moonless night outside my window. "Who are you?" He did not answer me. I could feel a sense of authority this man had. "What do you want?" He stared into my eyes, unblinking, before he spoke. "Tell me exactly what you saw down there." That's all he said. He seemed tense, and he stared at me, waiting for me to respond. His eyes were so strange. One blue, one brown, deep set in wrinkled and leathered skin. He spoke with such conviction, staring into my soul. So I told him. Every detail. What happened to Zeke, how I escaped, what it looked like. And when I was done, he didn't speak for a minute. I could feel him relax a bit, before just nodding and standing up to walk away. "Wait!" I said, and he stopped in the doorway, barely turning his head, looking back at me over his shoulder. I wanted to ask him what that thing was, what it had done to my coworker, how the hell it was alive, if I was safe. I didn't say anything, though. I was well medicated and still in a bit of shock. He gave me a small nod before speaking to me one last time. Don't stay in one place for too long. Now it has your scent. He gave me one last look of pity and vanished out the door. The police did go down into that section of sewers. They sent a few teams of detectives and forensics to sweep the general area I tried to describe to them. I wasn't much help, though, and they never really did believe me. Apparently, the section of tunnels I had emerged from was drastically different from what I had described. They had only seen the normal tunnels. They never found anything. No smeared blood on the walls. No twisted, mangled corpse of my partner. No writhing mass of moving, rotting flesh. The only thing they found were a few pieces of Zeke's broken walkie-talkie stuck into the sole of my shoe, and a single hair of his stuck to the ladder on the way down. Neither of which revealed any new details, rather just confirming he had indeed been down there. The police could tell I had clearly gone through a significant trauma. I knew some of them thought I did it, but they had no evidence to suggest I committed foul play, so no charges were filed. And that was pretty much it. Ezekiel didn't have much family, or friends, I suppose, and I quit my job as soon as I could. I still can't stand to be in a room that doesn't have windows. I feel guilty, of course, about leaving Zeke. I ran first, and by the end he was begging me for help. Even if I could have helped, I know if I'd gone chasing after him, if I'd foolishly tried and been a hero, I would be a part of that thing just like him. I hope he didn't suffer. I hope he isn't still suffering. The old man's words kept playing in my head. Don't stay in one place for too long. It has your scent. I hadn't noticed anything strange for a while, and almost convinced myself that he must have just been some drug-induced dream. But, well, the other day, I heard a noise. A scraping noise coming from my basement. It's probably nothing, but I locked my basement door just in case.